Dune 2 is a tragedy. Not because of the rise of Paul Atreides or the start of a false war or the doomed fate of the intergalactic empire, but because of what they did to my girl Chani. Dune Part 2, which from here on I'll just be calling Dune 2, is the follow-up to Denis Villeneuve's Dune, which came out in 2021. Now, when I first watched Dune, I had never read the books. In fact, it had been quite a few years since I had read anything of any literary substance at all. Going into it blind, I was disappointed. I had heard great things about the Dune series, the Dune franchise, and many of my friends even watched the movie and loved it. But when I did, I thought it was strange, weirdly paced, and just generally bland. Now, the internet did what the internet does best and said I was wrong, citing a massive codex of lore, thousands of worlds, centuries of epic storylines. So I finally gave in and I read Frank Herbert's Dune. I was blown away. It was unlike anything I'd ever read. And as I've continued to read more and more over the last few years, my appreciation for the work has only grown. A well-balanced story which explores intergalactic politics, religion, and revenge. It's tense and fascinatingly introspective. Have I used enough $5 words to convince you that I liked it? So in preparation for Dune 2, I went back and watched the first movie. And I loved every bit of it. Mainly, it suffered from the fact that the books rely on a complex interplay of internal dialogue with actual dialogue, showing you what characters are really thinking and scheming in real time. That's very difficult to do in film, and unless you had constant voiceover, which I think would have been very disconcerting.
A beginning is a very delicate time.
The only other option is subtlety, something done masterfully in the first Dune film. So after months of anticipation and waiting, this weekend I finally sat down and watched Dune 2. And honestly, I really have no idea what to think. So let's start with the good stuff. It was a gorgeous film. As a fan of the books, you'd be surprised how much of the world building, suits of armor, spaceships, and technology are mentioned but not described in depth. So to see Villeneuve's take on Herbert's sci-fi fantasy universe was incredible. It brought the entire novel to life in strange, otherworldly glory, and that was absolutely breathtaking. I mean, Getty Prime? I thought the black and white was just going to be a stylistic thing. But the fact that it wasn't, and they developed this whole unspoken lore for the cold brutality of the Harkonnen people, while also delivering on stunning visuals, is a perfect example of the attention to detail and the labor of love that this film was for the creative team behind it. The music was the same. In the first film, it had taken me off guard, and for whatever reason, Zimmer's score was just too strange for me to appreciate. But this time, in listening to it, I was completely immersed. Paul and Chani's haunting love theme, the belting chant that arose as Paul slowly became what he feared most that he would become. I mean, come on. When those Atreides bagpipes came roaring in the finale as Raban took on Duncan, Idaho.
Look who's back from the dead.
It was incredible. And Zimmer's score was in perfect harmony for the vision that Villeneuve had for this film. The star-studded cast delivered phenomenal performances as to be expected, and I didn't even hate Christopher Walken as the Emperor. The standout, of course, though, was Austin Butler as Fade Routha. Butler was one of those actors I just hadn't gotten behind yet. I did not like his Elvis, and I had never watched any of the things he had done as a younger actor on Nickelodeon or any of those things, but this role was haunting. Butler disappeared, embodying the terrifying Harkonnen prince in a way that I could have never imagined just reading about him. His whole character existed like a horror movie within the larger movie. I couldn't stop watching him out of morbid fascination, and yet I desired more than anything to look away. What's even wilder is that Butler created a lasting impact on myself and almost everyone else that watched the film with only 16 minutes of screen time in an almost 3-hour-long movie. Overall, there were definitely some issues with the film. The pacing was a little weird. Denis has a very reflective style of filmmaking, and there were times it felt like the plot dragged strangely when it really didn't need to. But my only real issue with the film, and I think by far the biggest problem, was Chani. Now, I don't want to make this a Zendaya roast session. I think she's a talented actress, and personally, I've never hated anything she's done. Physically, she even fit the role of Chani as a, quote, skinny girl with elfin eyes. But when it came to character and actual acting, Paul and Chani are the heart of the Dune tale, a way to personalize Paul's assimilation and growing loyalty to the Fremen people. It's this connection and relationship that makes the tragedy of Paul's descent so much worse. Now, when I was doing research for this film, I found out that a lot of people didn't like Chani's character in the books. They felt like she was kind of useless and really just passive. But I think they missed the point. The books are about Paul, and while Chani may not take up many pages, the scenes she's in are phenomenal. Herbet does a fantastic job of communicating everything you need to know about her in just a few simple conversations. You like her, you like Paul, you root for them, and you love their romance. I know that Herbet was frustrated that people seemed to miss the point of his first novel, which was a commentary on the dangers of religion and messianic figures. But I think this effect aids it. It makes me, the audience, root for Paul, love him before the curtain pulls back. It's as if you fall for his charisma as well, as if you're almost along with Paul, making the tragic decisions because it would be oh so hard not to. Now, I have nothing wrong with film adaptations taking creative liberty. Lord of the Rings is my favorite franchise of all time. It's the greatest film franchise of all time, and they certainly take some well-needed creative liberty. I even encourage films to do it. But in Dune 2, in an effort to make Chani more of a character, to make the themes that Herbet struggled to communicate clearer, they robbed her and the narrative of everything that makes Chani interesting. She was changed from a loyal, loving partner to an angry, doubting atheist. I understand that Denis wanted to bridge the narrative gap between Dune and Dune Messiah, but in an effort to make the narrative clearer, he hits us over the head with the themes of the novel, and he uses Chani as the one to do it. Chani and Paul's romance was simply not believable. They had very little chemistry and just made out a few times, and it felt more like a wild high school fling than an actual, real, fleshed-out romance. So when the narrative began to lean into the drama of the finale and all it means for the two characters, I just felt nothing. And because of this, Paul's change wasn't felt on a local emotional level, even though it was epic, awesome, and very well visually communicated. With Chani positioned as the unwavering arbiter of non-religious belief, Fremen unity was something that also started to slip and not make as much sense in this film adaptation. For example, towards the beginning of the film, Stilgar shows Lady Jessica a gigantic pool of water stored in the heart of the Fremen Sietch. It is sacred, a resting place for the remaining water of all the fallen Fremen, and therefore untouchable by anyone else in the tribe. It's a great scene, and a perfect way to demonstrate the silent irrationality that religious fanaticism can lead to, even if it threatens one's own life. But if Chani and many of the northern Fremen are as skeptical of religious ritual and superstition as the film makes them out to be, then why was this not a bigger problem? Why hadn't anyone asked questions in the first place, or tried drinking the water, or heck, started a mini revolution when lives and dehydration were at stake? The subtlety of the Dune novel, and even, the film Dune Part 1, are some of my favorite things about the work as a whole. But in an effort to right the admitted wrongs of Frank Herbet, I think Denis Villeneuve went a little too far in the opposite direction. Now, it would be unfair to label Chani as an early 2000s girl boss. She did have a character and did have a character arc, and some of my favorite scenes were when that character arc was showcased. The ending, for example, was one of the few times I cared about Chani and Paul because they finally let Chani be vulnerable and relatable, feeling pain and anguish as opposed to bland hate or emotionless professions of love. To see the heartbreak in her eyes hurt. I felt that, and I wish I had seen more of it throughout the film. Overall, the best way I think I can summarize Dune 2 is as some, modern day version of an epic poem in the style of the Iliad or the Odyssey. It's not for everyone, and I certainly wouldn't suggest watching it after a long day at work, but it is good. It's more than good. It's phenomenal and breathtaking. There were parts I loved, parts I didn't, and many parts which I just want to watch again so I can fully absorb. As a whole, it's a net positive, a work whose cultural impact on visual effects, film, the sci-fi genre, and storytelling as a whole is impossible to ignore. Now, because of its loyalty to the book and I think overall narrative cohesion, I do have to say that I like Part 1 better than Part 2, despite, the action and kind of more engaging topics of Part 2. But at this point, I'm probably due for a rewatch, and I am kind of curious to see what I decide as time goes on in thinking about this film. But enough about me. Let me know what you guys thought in the comments down below. Do you think I'm right? Do you think I'm wrong? Let's have some discussions, some disagreements. What parts of the film did you like? What parts of the books did you wish had been in the films but weren't? And most importantly, no matter what you do, keep reading, keep writing, and I'll see you all in the next video.